afternoon, everyone. I am Bob Pianta, the Dean of the School of Education and Human Development at the University of Virginia, and welcome to the TomTom Cities Rising Summit, a virtual event series exploring critical issues surfaced by the COVID-19 pandemic. This week's theme is We Are Being Graded, Community Partnership on the Path to Stronger, Fairer Education. We're delighted today to welcome Kaya Henderson, former superintendent of the DC Public Schools, to our conversation. Our plan for the session is that after some housekeeping, I will offer a few brief remarks, then introduce Kaya for her opening remarks, and then we'll move into a discussion around several key issues related to the broad themes of equity and community, including partnerships that create pathways to stronger educational opportunities for all of our students. We've planned some time toward the end of the hour for your questions. First, some housekeeping. This talk is being live streamed and will be recorded and available on TomTom's YouTube channel. As an attendee, please keep in mind that you'll be off camera and have no audio. However, you may use the chat function at the bottom of your screen to connect with other participants. You may also use the Q&A function to ask questions. Please put your questions into the Q&A as they arise, and we'll offer them to Kaya starting around 3:40. So before introducing Kaya, let me provide some context for today's discussion. I think in the same way that 9/11 was a stress test and wake-up call for national security, one might think of COVID as a stress test for public education. The pandemic has revealed a system that operates on thin margins and has exposed all of its inequity and vulnerabilities. So as we think about the current and future state of education and solutions that promote equity, we might take a few lessons from the pandemic as we plan for the future. So here's a few observations. First, we underinvest in education. We argue all the time about money that's spent on education. The pandemic illustrates really how we fail to deliver on that. Just this past week, the Washington Post reported that of the many trillions in COVID stimulus, just under 20 billion went to K-12. It's hard to argue that that's too much money for what we claim is a national priority for kids' well-being and necessary for the reopening of the economy. I think second, the pandemic has taught us the value and skill of our teachers. We have all learned this by teaching and learning online, and parents have certainly learned this every time they try to keep their kids' attention on activities at home, mostly with just 2 or 3 kids instead of 20 or 30. Clearly, our future plans have to strengthen the preparation support for educators, not just training, but salaries. And we can't continue to expect teachers in schools to correct for all the shortcomings of our society. Third, technology is really a mixed bag. We spend about 20 billion annually on an assortment of tech for education, and about 75% of the resources that we purchase with those funds are either never used, and most of them are never evaluated for impact. But we know that access to online and other learning resources is also highly unequal, mostly because of broadband inequality, and it hits low income and rural communities the most. Although tech is certainly a part of the future and may play a critical role in equity, we need serious investment in effective systems that educators can and will use. I think fourth, the pandemic has spawned a proliferation of alternatives to traditional schools. We see this everywhere. Homeschooling is on the rise and likely to increase, and may actually shift to a more private-like school options for a growing number of children who are more likely to be affluent. How that trend impacts our support for public schools is critical to any effort to strengthen those schools. Most of what we know about privatized school models is they may exacerbate inequality. And finally, we face a staggering and perhaps generational increase in inequality of educational opportunity and outcome, which will have long-term consequences for the country and for tens of millions of children and families. Estimates of learning loss just from the spring are roughly 30% in reading and math overall, and closer to 50% in reading and 70% in math for children from low-income families, English language learners, and children of color. Add another year to that, and we can only imagine that things get much worse. Compounding those challenges are the mental health and health needs of stressed children and families. So those are the realities. So let's pivot to some solutions. And in that way, it's my great pleasure to introduce to you Kaya Henderson, an educator with rich experience and notable success in forming and enabling partnerships that work for educating all children. Kaya Henderson is the CEO of Reconstruction, a technology company delivering a K-12 supplemental curriculum that situates Black people, culture, and contributions in an authentic, identity-affirming way in society. She is also the co-host of Pod Save the People and leads Kaya Henderson Consulting. She is perhaps best known for serving as Chancellor of DC Public Schools from 2010 to 2016. Her tenure was marked by consecutive years of enrollment growth, an increase in graduation rates, improvements in student satisfaction and teacher retention, increases in AP participation and pass rates, and the greatest growth of any urban district on the National Assessment of Education Progress over multiple years. I think everyone recognizes across the country the success that Kaya had as a leader, and that DC public schools have been a remarkable bastion of innovation in urban education. Kaya's career began as a middle school Spanish teacher in the South Bronx through Teach for America. She went on to work as a recruiter, national admissions director, and DC executive director for Teach for America, and then served as the vice president of strategic partnerships at the New Teacher Project until she began her tenure at DCPS as deputy chancellor in 2007. She most recently led the Global Learning Lab for Community Impact at Teach for All, supporting educators in more than 50 countries. A native of Mount Vernon, New York, Kaya graduated from Mount Vernon Public Schools. She received her bachelor's degree in international relations and her Master of Arts in Leadership from Georgetown, as well as honorary doctoral degrees from Georgetown and Trinity University. Her board memberships include the Aspen Institute, Curriculum Associates, Robin Hood NYC, and Teach for America, and she is the co-founder of Education Leaders of Color. Welcome, Kaya.
Thank you, Bob. It's so good to be here.
Yeah, it's just great. Thanks very much for joining us. I'd like you to take a few moments to reflect for a while on this issue of equity, both in American society, education and equity. You know, they often travel together using the same rhetoric and policy language. And as you reflect on your work as an educator, a leader, an innovator, what comes to your mind around the connection between education and equity? Is education this equalizer we hope for? And are we actually ensuring, opportunities for kids? And what are the barriers and possibilities there? So please share your thoughts.
When I think about the partnership or the connection between education and equity, I'm of two minds. On the one hand, I think that what it really takes to ensure equity for people in the United States of America is far more than what needs to happen in an education system. Education is part of the equity equation in that it helps give people access to different life opportunities, different economic opportunities. But when we are addressing the educational issues and trying to deal with equity from that perspective and ignoring housing issues, ignoring healthcare issues, ignoring job, workforce development, job access opportunity issues, right? Justice issues, then there's no way that there's no way that education alone can ensure equity for young people. And so I say often that schools are the stage on which all of society's problems perform. And so schools then are the people tasked with fixing all of the things that society has wrought. And in fact, sometimes we get so caught up in fixing all of those other things that we can't get to the heart of our job, our core work, which is teaching and learning. I mean, even if you just look at the closures during COVID, right? The first question that people were asking was not, and this is closing of any magnitude, closing schools for snow days, closing school for a global pandemic. The first question you ask is, how are kids gonna eat? That's not the first question that a superintendent should be asking, but every time you have to close a school, the first question that you're asking is, how are kids going to eat? Because you know that for some kids, this is the only place that they're going to eat, or that they're going to have contact with a caring adult, or that somebody is going to notice what's going on in their home life and connect them to the appropriate services. So schools are really tasked with, trying to dig people out of this equity hole. that I just don't, we aren't staffed to do that. We are not funded to do that. And yet and still, because this is the place where kids show up, this is, what we expect of schools. And so I think it's really important. I was asked a question earlier today about mayoral control, and do I still believe in mayoral control? And in fact, what this pandemic has made me believe is mayoral control is actually even more important now than ever before. Because what mayoral control or gubernatorial control, I'll point to Gina Raimondo, the governor of Rhode Island, who centralized the state schools reopening plan, put private and public schools all on the same calendar, deployed the National Guard to open testing centers, deployed the Department of Health. When you have an executive like a mayor or a governor, they can deploy all of the resources that support schools in allowing school to do what it does, which is teaching and learning. We were only able to achieve so much at DC Public Schools because I didn't have to worry about how to repair school buildings. I could push that to the Department of General Services. I didn't have to worry about who was going to plow the snow or mow the lawns on my buildings because the Department of Public Works did that. I didn't have to worry about managing school nurses and the changing requirements because the Department of Health did that. The Department of Behavioral Health supported us with psychologists and social workers. I mean, I literally had the whole government at my disposal working with me because that's what the three mayors who I work with, that's what they directed. And a school board, bless their hearts, don't have the ability to call upon all of those resources. At best, they are advocating and lobbying and trying to pull those resources in. But when you have these kinds of situations like a global pandemic or just a turnaround of an urban school system, you need to deploy many more resources than what is at play in schools and school budgets. That being said, I do think that one of the things that I enjoyed about being a school district and not being an individual, a charter school or a private school or whatever, was I think about a school district as guaranteeing what I would call an equity floor. What do we owe all of our children across the city of Washington, no matter what neighborhood they're in? If we believe that foreign language is good for young people, then let's guarantee that for all of our kids, right? If we believe that, art, music, PE, library, computers are integral for a great education, then let's guarantee that across every single school. That to me is what public education is about. How do we create an equity floor? What is the least that we want to give to our kids, to every single kid, no matter what their station in life or what their neighborhood is? Now, beyond that, different schools can individualize and have a theme or have a concentration or bring more resources to bear or whatever, but what is the minimum that we need to guarantee for our young people? It's not okay to have foreign language teachers in this part of the city in elementary schools and not in the other part. It's not okay to have 37 AP courses in one high school and no AP courses in another high school. And so a lot of the way that I thought about equity in public education is what is the standard that I want from my kids? And how do I guarantee that for every kid in the district? And then the rest is gravy. You can do whatever you want to do. But what is the minimum that we're going to guarantee for every kid? And that is the way that we try to operate. That's the way that we approached equity within the school district. And I think that it challenged a lot of people's thinking because as Americans, we believe in rugged individualism. We believe in every man for themselves. We believe in bootstrapping and whatnot. But I actually feel like public education has a critical role in ensuring an educated citizenry, in providing opportunities for people to pursue the American dream, if you still believe in that. And I believe that in order to do that, we have to guarantee an equality of opportunity by giving people at least a particular standard.
Great. Yeah, thanks very much for that, Kaya. I had one of the questions I was going to ask you at one point was around is education one of these it takes a village type of enterprises, and I think you made an abundantly clear argument for why it is. So thanks for that. But I do want to dive in a little bit more on kind of under the hood a little bit on this last issue that you talked about, which is really what is the floor? What are the set of common denominators, the common assurances, commitments that we make as educators and really as communities to ensure that takes place in the schools. And again, thinking about those common denominators in the context of pressures that you described being on schools to solve everything, right? But in your time, particularly in DC, it strikes me that one of the reasons for your success was in part the partnerships, and you could essentially kind of outsource some of that, but that also enabled you to focus on really what's taking place inside schools and classrooms, even more classrooms. And if you were to think about the three things that were the keys to driving the kind of outcomes for kids that we saw under your tenure and still see, what would be those things? So it's really a priority setting kind of question.
Yeah, I mean, before I tell you what those three things were, which I feel like I can live, breathe, and eat them, sleep them, I will say that this ability to focus on the core work of the school district is revolutionary. Yeah. It was unique to us. It is why many systems don't ever get the chance to succeed the way we do, because they weren't freed up from all of these other issues that other people took care of for us. And so I would make the plea that we have to start figuring out how to free schools up from these very important but ancillary things to the issues of teaching and learning. If teachers have to do 900 different things and can't teach, then, I mean, we don't ask CEOs to do whatever organization you run, you do that thing, right? If you are Goodyear, you get really good at making tires. Now you might not make the axles. There might be other things that you need to make your tires go well. You might not, develop the rubber. I don't know how these things work, but there are people who do that so that you can make tires really well. And I think we have to get away from schools being able to do all of these things really well and give us the freedom to get really good at teaching and learning. Teaching and learning is hard. It is really hard. And we have not had the ability to develop our people in the right way, to think critically about curriculum, to engage our stakeholders. Bam, those are the three things that we did differently that I think made a huge difference. First, we focused relentlessly on human capital. Any organization is only as good as the people who are in the organization. And so we were relentless about getting, growing, and keeping great teachers, getting, growing, and keeping great leaders, getting, growing, and keeping great central office staff, because those people support your frontline workers. And so we were able to build a machine, a system where we were consistently not just bringing people in, evaluating people against our standards, right? Because what we've allowed for teaching, I think, has been, I don't know, mediocre at best and damaging at worst. But we set a very high standard for what teaching was going to look like in the district. And we constantly told people where they were against that standard. And we constantly provided professional development opportunities, and we put money in place, and we moved things around so that we had a system, a human capital system. I would say all the time, our job is to develop people. We take little people and develop them into good big people, and we take big people and develop them into better big people. Like those are the tires that we make, right? And so a relentless focus on getting, growing, and keeping the best people, rewarding the people who are going above and beyond, doing whatever you can to retain those people. That is not generally how school systems work. So first, to focus on human capital. Second, deep work around curriculum. So with human capital, I would say, we changed our expectations for teachers. With curriculum, we changed our expectations for kids. We changed what was happening in classrooms. We developed curriculum over the course of 3 years in partnership with our teachers, and at the behest of our families and our students who told us what they wanted to see in an education from DC Public Schools. And we then worked to deliver on what they were demanding. And they were demanding not the same old, same old. They wanted global. They wanted a hardcore academic foundation. They wanted global to compete in the, new millennium. They wanted connections to workforce. They wanted their kids to be digital natives. And we took that feedback and we worked with our teachers to develop our own curriculum. We didn't buy it from a textbook company. We paid our very best teachers who we knew from our evaluation system on the human capital side. And we said, dream with us. What would be the most amazing lessons? How could they be rigorous? How could they be joyful? How could they, our family said, we want our kids to be learning things about themselves and their community. So how does the curriculum create mirrors for kids to see themselves? But we also want them to see the world and to explore new things. So what windows could we create? And so we did deep curriculum work over 3 years that was aligned to the Common Core reading, writing, and math standards. And we did it in partnership with our teachers. And you cannot tell me that that's not part of the reason why we saw so much success. And then the third thing was deep engagement with students, families, and community members. I would say all the time, these are not my schools, these are our schools. And so we are gonna make decisions together. We're gonna make the fun decisions, like what do we want in a new curriculum? We're gonna make the hard decisions together, like which schools should we close so that we can realign our resources to be more effective and efficient. And my community showed up every single time. They, I would say to my team all the time, we have some expertise, but so does the community. And just because their expertise is not on a PowerPoint or on a spreadsheet, it doesn't mean they don't have strategies. It doesn't mean they don't have experience. It doesn't mean they don't have ideas. And in fact, when we put together their skills and strategies and experience with our skills and strategies and experience, then we get to like the magic happening, right? Because the people closest to the problem often have the best ideas around what the solution should be. But that requires you having to trust your community. That requires you having to believe that there are good things happening in your community. And far too many times when we look at communities that are experiencing challenge, the way DCPS was when we got there in 2007, I mean, we were the lowest performing urban school district in the country on the NAEP. And we then believe we put that on communities. This community is broken. These people don't know what they're doing. No, in many cases, those people have been telling leaders, yeah, right, we shouldn't do this, we shouldn't do that, right? And so, great human capital, rigorous academic curriculum that was also joyful and met the needs of our, and deep engagement with our community. Those were the three things that turned it all around for us at DC Public Schools.
Mm-hmm. Let me push a little bit on some of these, because I think I can imagine that you give this talk and in other contexts, and you go through those three things, and I can imagine somebody sitting in the audience and saying, well, that just doesn't work here for reason X, Y, or Z, right? So this sounds familiar.
I wish I had $1 for every time somebody
right.
said that.
Right. And so, because you're talking about real innovations in governance and real innovations around human capital, you're talking about, sometimes work on curriculum that, while owned and developed by teachers, to the degree that it becomes the school or the district curriculum, it runs into this tension of a teacher, really having her ownership of that curriculum in her own classroom. So I think, can you describe a little bit about how you would reply to, to folks who push back and say, look, the conditions here just don't make that possible for me. So what, how do you respond to some of those comments?
So first, I think that there is a question around will. Whatever you want to get done, you do, right? Mm-hmm. You prioritize, you make the time, you rearrange resources. And while you can't do everything at once, I mean, we didn't start out doing all three of those things, right? You start out doing one thing. And I think there are a set of principles that drive you around how you want to do your work. So, when I came into DC Public Schools, our theory of action was just get good people, right? if you get good people, then they'll take care of the rest. And so we were relentless in recruiting. We were relentless in talking to our teachers who we knew were good and asking them to stay. We were relentless about, whatever. And when and those teachers said to us, the how I wanted to do my work, or how we wanted to do our work, was listening to the people who knew what they were doing. And so before we did anything, we did 100 and something interviews with teachers to say, what do you need to be successful? Because if we're getting and keeping great people, we want to make sure that they have what they need to be successful. And so teachers said, we actually don't know how you want us to teach, because our principal's saying one thing, the test says a different thing, our interim assessments are not aligned. Just tell us how you want us to teach. And so we developed the teaching and learning framework, because that's what our teachers asked for, right? And we said, here's where you are against it. And then they were like, okay, we know how you want us to teach. And we were giving them feedback. And this is what, most people know as the impact teacher evaluation system. And as we got that rolling, people were like, okay, great. We know how you want us to teach, but let's talk about what we're teaching, because I'm teaching this in the 3rd grade on this side of town. And I know the 3rd grade teacher on the other side of town is teaching something different. Right. I don't know if I'm reaching the standard, blah, blah, blah. And so we said, okay, we need to jump into this curriculum piece, right? And so our teachers, our engagement with our teachers and our stakeholders are the thing that then led us into curriculum. And then literally, as that developed, people were like, we need more professional development. We know how to do some of this, but we don't know how to do all of this. We need different time. We need more time with kids. And so we moved to try to extend the day in as many schools as we possibly could. And we revamped our professional development approach. Instead of just having people, focus on pedagogy, our teachers were asking for deep content professional development. And so we shifted our whole entire paradigm. How we operated was always in conversation with the people who were doing the work. And that then allowed our theory to evolve over time. For people who say they can't do this, pick one thing that you really believe is going to be important, do that thing, and listen to the people around you. They will then surface the next thing for you to do and the next thing for you to do. I can speak now, looking back on 13 years of experience around this, but that's not how it happened. We didn't come in and set out to do X, Y, and Z. We set out to do one thing, and we listened to our people, and that surfaced other things. And that helped us build political cover to do some of the more difficult things, and that helped us build partnerships to do more of the difficult things. I think you can't, the saying is, how do you eat an elephant one bite at a time? And so I think you go into it with ambition around one thing that is a key lever, and you work with people. You work with your politicians, you work with your philanthropists, you work with your community stakeholders to get everybody rowing to get a vision, a shared vision, and to row in the right direction. And then literally each step will reveal itself, I think, over time.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I did want to follow up a little bit on this, on impact on the human capital, because you really, under Michelle Rhee's leadership initially, and then you did a tremendous amount to improve and innovate on it. The district was by far the leader in essentially kind of performance evaluation and accountability, and really accountability around opportunity, which places the accountability lever and focus on the opportunity structure and process rather than on the kids at the out, in the back end, which I thought was tremendously important. If you, in looking back on that, and clearly that was a major lever for the work that you did and that cascaded into all those other areas. As you would think about the future of that work and of the role, given the fundamental role of human capital, why or why not did impact not kind of scale further? How come we didn't see every district picking this up? As you would look ahead to those kind of systems in the future, are there any tweaks you would make or modifications you would make?
It's an interesting question. there is no doubt in my mind that we could not have achieved what we achieved without putting this performance evaluation piece in place, and in place first. It told us everything that we needed to know about what we needed to do to improve teaching and learning in the district. And I would say that, again, we were in a very unique situation. So the first thing that made it unique was that we didn't have to negotiate our evaluation system with the teachers union. And in most school districts, you have to evaluate, you have to negotiate your evaluation. Now, I would, I mean, find me a law firm who wants to challenge that, and I would go to work for them, because in no other place, usually evaluation is a management right. The workers don't get to develop the evaluation tool. So I don't know why we have to negotiate with the teachers union, but there was a little known caveat in the federal law, actually, that allowed DC public schools to develop and implement a performance evaluation system without negotiating. Wow. And I happened to find that as I was reading the contract. Nobody reads teachers union contracts, but I found that. And I was still deputy chancellor, and human capital was under my purview. And so I'm reading the contract, and I literally called my lawyer and I said, I think this says we don't have to negotiate. And he says, I think you're right, but let me double check. And literally, it's just one of those things that, like, when you pay attention to the detail, you find these, doorways that you can walk through. So one, I think the reason why it didn't scale was because people needed to negotiate with their teachers union. I think a second piece is the way we as a field handled teacher evaluation was, I think, wrong. We decided, we wielded it like a club. We went the policy route by trying to get states then to mandate all of these super weird policies around teacher evaluation. I just don't think that that's how evaluation systems go. I think they have to be developed locally. Again, while our teachers union was not happy with it, we had hundreds of meetings with teachers asking, how do you want to be evaluated? Do you want to be evaluated 3 times, 5 times? Do you want to be your principal? Do you want to be a content expert? Do you have to? We didn't make this up ourselves sitting in the ivory tower of central office. We did this with our teachers. And so I think that there are a lot of places that are afraid. I talk to superintendents who are like, I can't talk to my teachers directly. I got to go through a union. No, actually, those are your employees. You could talk to them directly. You can have a focus group at a teacher's cabinet. Right? And so there are some notions that we're just locked into because we've been doing them the way we've been doing them. And I think we need to drop that. But as I was saying, I think we went about teacher evaluation in the wrong way. We held up money in Race to the Top and said, everybody who runs towards teacher evaluation, whether you did it right, wrong, or otherwise, like, you could get this. And so we saw lots of people hastily approaching it. And I think we made tons of mistakes. I'm using the royal we. Made tons of mistakes such that I actually don't think that we will have the opportunity to improve on teacher evaluation for decades, right? Yeah, it'll be another generation before we can go back and even open this, really important lever to improve teaching. And, to be frank, in DC, like, what's so interesting is there are lots of calls for, we should abolish impact. Oh, right. The thing that is helping us to get these outsized gains, you want to rip it back because you remember how good teacher evaluation was, the 1-pager checklist where we were not giving teachers real feedback, where we were spending millions of dollars on professional development and we had no idea whether there was a return on our investment because we didn't know who was good or what they needed to improve upon. Literally, I feel like people have no recollection of what it was like before, and they're like, I don't like this piece, and so let's get rid of it. And so I would say, we are lucky in DC to still have it. And I am also incredibly worried that the forces that be are working to pull it apart.
Yeah. I think, just in some of the work that we've done more on the early childhood side of some of this, these kind of efforts, it has struck me that the overwhelming value of having a system such as impact, but something that describes practice in a very transparent way, and then becomes the standard for practice across a system, is such a powerful tool for all of the participants in that system.
Yeah,
You know,
well, I mean, part of the reason why teaching is so hard is because we throw people into this thing without any expectations of what your performance is going to look like. And so, yes, it's going to be hard. But if we can say to teachers, this is what good teaching looks like, and here are the resources that we have to support you. And oh, by the way, you're not doing well in this and that. Here are 3 teachers who excel in that. Here are 2 workshops you can go to. Here are 3 books that you should read. That's what Impact allowed us to do. And it wasn't just for teachers, principals, custodians, counselors. It made everybody in the school responsible for student achievement, for working together. And so we also often hear this, teachers, are getting hit over the head with impact. How about everybody got a standard for what their job should look like? This was about setting expectations. We call it the teaching and learning framework. This is what it looks like. And then here's where you are against it.
Yeah, it just is such a remarkable tool for kind of aligning your resources. And in that way, I think it becomes a way of actually saving human capital.
Absolutely.
Because you don't have a lot of people running around trying to figure out, where they are or
That's right.
Invent the next thing. So let me shift gears a little bit to talk about, another element. I think that's just been a kind of feature of the DC schools for some time, which is charter schools. You operated a system alongside, included, sometimes didn't. A very large portfolio and a very mixed portfolio of charter schools. And in that context, I think, recognized, really nationally as kind of this innovation zone for models of schooling. What do you think? We've now, as a field, been doing charters for almost 3 decades. What have we learned from the charter experience? Not so much as charters competing with public schools, but charters as models for schooling. What have we learned from that, do you think?
I think it's an interesting question. Let's see, how should I say this? So I'll start by talking about DC and the landscape there. And quite frankly, the charter system was set up to compete with and to ultimately put out of business the traditional public schools system. And there were people who actually did not believe, who we were losing enrollment, thousands of kids each year, so much so that I want to say it was I think it was supposed to be by 2013 or 2014, charters were, if we had continued on the trajectory of loss, charters would have more students, more of a market share than the traditional public school system. We were going to be New Orleans without the storm, right? And much to people's chagrin, some people's chagrin, the DC public schools actually started to reinvent itself. And the way I thought about the competition was, I'm happy to compete. And in the beginning, I had strident public school advocates who were like, they're out recruiting you. They're out marketing you. And I said, look, I don't want to recruit or market until my product gets good. I can't sell a bad product. And when I got there, we had a bad product. And so we worked really hard to build up our product, our teachers, our curriculum, and to make DCPS's education something that parents would want. And once we were able to do that, and I think there are benefits to being a district at scale in the same way that I think there are benefits to being an individual operator or a small network of schools, there are different things. And what I would say all the time is, I'm Target, right? I have to sell garden hoses and clothes and food and whatever. I have to provide for whatever people in the city need. And our charters are able to be boutiques. In fact, you could just sell swimsuits or just sell glasses. And so for people who know that they just want their kids to have a great swimsuit, they can go to a charter school. That's great. But many more people don't know what they want for their kids, or they want a broader something. And so I can offer that. And in fact, I can do some things that charters can't do. I think what we've learned over time is we need both. You cannot have a system of schools where somebody is not responsible for every single kid, no matter where they land. Charters can only do what they do because there is a system to catch the kids who don't get into the lottery or who have severe needs and they don't actually have those kinds of special education services, or kids don't follow the norms and so they get put out, or parents can't give 10 hours a week. I was responsible for everybody. There was no choice, right? And I had to provide something for everybody. And I think that there is there's no way that charters could be successful if there is not a district or somebody to pick up the pieces, number one. Number two, what I think we've learned is, I think coming into this experiment, people believe that school was easy, educators are just dumb, central office people were just wasteful bureaucrats and whatnot. I think what we've all learned is, in fact, that schooling is hard and bureaucracies are really important. As I look, what is a charter management organization? It is a central office for charter schools, right? Because everybody recruiting and everybody running their own operations is just not feasible, right? And so what I think we've learned is that, in fact, there's a validation of the district model. I think that there's a validation of how difficult some of this stuff is. And every single one of us knows places where we have created an excellent classroom or an excellent school or an excellent handful of schools. But the thing that both charters and districts are pursuing and that we have not been able to touch is quality at scale.
At scale.
They cannot. The KIPP could be the best charter management organization in the world, but if they got 100 schools, 100 of their schools are not amazing. Just like 100 of DCPS's schools are not amazing. This quality at scale thing is the thing that is elusive for us both. And so what I think we've learned is that, in fact, they are incredible bastions or opportunities to create innovation or to create specialization or whatever it is. But I think we've learned that they're not a panacea. I think we've learned that, in fact, we need both. And we've stopped now with this rhetoric around competition, and now we're talking about cooperation. Yeah. And I think that cooperation is the way you solve big problems.
Yeah, I think that's right. It really is. It really is striking to me. I think that this point you make about scale, and I think it's so often that we see even KIPP, which is as you point out, it's one of the larger, if not the largest, charter management and school model, still operates at a scale that's quite small in terms of its overall footprint in comparison to even a moderate size urban school system. So and to your point, the kind of variety that of student needs that the public schools have to deal with is really kind of stunning. But that issue of scale is really one that I think is not well appreciated a lot of times when we talk about these differences. So one of the things that I raised in my remarks, and it's something that that I noticed in your bio you have some experience with, is around the role of ed tech, and how we again, here we are, 20 billion a year. I think it's probably the case that you could probably sell most any flashy solution to a school system and have success as a private sector entrepreneur. So there's just these examples of a disconnect between the enormous power of the tech sector to probably deliver, to be able to deliver solutions that may work, and either the capacity of the public school systems to either absorb good solutions or identify good solutions or demand good solutions. There just seems to be such a disconnect there. What are your thoughts about technology in general? Can this be something that helps us deal with the issue of equity? And then how would we go about that?
So I think, first of all, let me just say that anything as a panacea, right, is just not okay, right? Like television was supposed to revolutionize education. It didn't, right? Like, I mean, and so technology to revolutionize education, part of the solution for sure, right? But not the end all be all. I think we have to recognize, and tech people should stop actually saying that they are the end all be all. But I do think that what tech enables us to do a lot of different things. One of the most important things is differentiation, right? Which is the hardest thing a teacher has to do when you have lots of different kids at different levels and you've got to teach to all of them at the same time. Technology enables us to actually segment kids and get them what they need at the right level at the right time. I think that is critically important. Technology gives us information about kids that we haven't had before. Technology, I think what this COVID thing has done, so what I appreciate about the particular moment is that we have just zoomed light years past all of the arguments about one-to-one. Like, I think about my friend John Daisy, who was the superintendent in LA, and when he went to do a one-to-one iPad thing, the whole world went crazy. And now, like, we are at a point where we understand that every single kid has got to have a computer the same way they need a notebook and a piece of paper, right? We are now having conversations about broadband being free and ubiquitous in ways that, like, if this pandemic hadn't hit, we wouldn't be having this conversation, right? So we've leapfrogged into the ubiquity of technology as how we do education. And I think that one of the other very interesting things that is happening is the democratization of content creation. So previously, all content that kids got came from schools and school districts. But in fact, now you've got lots of people out creating content, supplemental content, academic content, all kinds of content. And you have parents and families and students who are consuming in a different way. They don't only get their content from school now, they're getting it from lots of different places. Their after school program, new entities like Reconstruction and Worldwide School and Khan Academy and Beast Academy, and there are all of these providers of content. And so I think that it begs the question, like, what is the role of an educational institution when people can access content from so many places? Not just content, but in fact, delivery of services. Right. We look at people who are hiring teachers to teach their pod, right? Or, different people who are employing not teachers, right? But actors and, whoever, people who have time on their hands. Now there are a whole group of homeschool moms who got good at it this spring and are now bringing up. So what happens when it's not just teachers who are teaching? What happens when it's not just, schools who are delivering content? How do we support an ecosystem where people are getting educational content from a lot of different places, curating it into a set of experiences for their kids or themselves? And how do we make sense of this? How do we validate that? How do we not validate that? Who's to say what is most important for kids to learn at this point? I think this pandemic has thrown up a bunch of questions that that we're going to have to wrestle with around the role of education in an increasingly individualized and democratized sort of information landscape.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you think about, the point about, again, it raises this tension of how individual can this be determined, or what is common gets common, right at yes. democracy fairly yes. quickly. Yes. What do we as citizens hold as kind of standards for the development and education of our children? What is it that we think they need to know or not know? Becomes really very, very interesting in the kind of world that you just described. And again, in that context, do schools play roles as kind of curators, as kind of certifiers, as validators, as much as they are providers directly?
And they have to be both, right? Because you are going to have families who don't have time to curate and whatever, right? I think about all of our essential service workers who we had to have schools open for. Or I think about, not just essential service, like people who have to work and who cannot coordinate their kids'
Yeah.
homeschool schedule, right? What do we do for them? And at the same time, we are responsible for people who are freelancing it, and they want, they want to understand how they can make their kids successful, and we have a responsibility to them as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So we've got about a little less than 10 minutes left. So I'm going to sort of shift to kind of a final topic and final question, give you some opportunity to talk a little bit further about this, because early in your remarks, you talked about the community and the ecosystem that you engaged in DC, and both the services that you're able to call upon, and the way that provided a lot of resources for you to be able to focus. One of the things that when I have conversations with superintendents or look at communities, very oftentimes I think a school leader will open the door and say, we do want the community to be part of this. And then there's, in a very positive way, there's an awful lot that comes towards you, right? And how did you begin to kind of sort and sift through that as a school and community leader to say, these are the things we really need, and we need to invest in these partnerships, and these are the ones that, thank you, but no thank you right now, or so there had to be some way of kind of triaging that, so that you just didn't spend all of your time trying to incorporate all of that into the system. Any thoughts
Absolutely.
about that?
Yeah. Before we even got to the point where people were giving us ideas, we actually had to rebuild trust with the community, because the way educators invite the community in is, here's what we're doing. We just told it to you. Check off the box for our family engagement. That's not engagement, right? And there was such a poor history of the district interacting with its families, making promises that it didn't keep, not meeting parental needs, being dismissive of parents and communities. And so, we went out and said, oh, we want to talk to you about things. And people were like, yeah, right. Yeah, been here before. Listen, new girl, you're lying to us just like the rest. And so we had to spend a lot of time how do you build relationships with people? You spend time with them. And so my team and I spent time in the community, in schools, in people's houses, doing living rooms, doing one-on-ones with people, and keeping our word and showing people, building credibility. We said we were going to do this, we did it, right? And people were like, oh, wait, these people are different. These people are more serious. These people are actually following through. Okay, let me try this. Let me try that. And so we had to slowly reopen the door by building relationships and regaining credibility that, frankly, the district didn't have. And then, once people saw us doing things, people were like, okay, you can do it, right? Which is a good problem, but it's a problem.
It's a problem you want to have. That's for sure.
It is a problem. Yeah. I think there were a couple of things that helped us manage. So first of all, we had a strategic plan. We had a set of 5 goals that we were pursuing, and those created guardrails for us. And so one question was, what does it have to do with helping us get to one of these 5 goals that we've all agreed upon? And if it's outside of that, maybe we'll do it later. But right now, the thing is these 5 goals. So that was helpful. I think what was also helpful is understanding why people were asking for certain things that didn't make sense to me or didn't seem to be a priority, and explaining why they weren't a priority. So I'll give you an example. When we needed to close and consolidate schools, and we did that in a very different way than we had ever done it before. We released all of the data that we had around that we were using to make decisions. We looked at, demographic trends. We looked at school utilization. We looked at budget. We looked at all kinds of things. We released all of that information to the community to say, look at what we're looking at and tell us what you would do differently. And literally we engage people, not in these weird town hall things where you stand up and say, please don't close my school, but sitting at a table with the data to say, okay, what do we do about this school that is underutilized by 67%, where we're paying 3 times as much per kid as somebody else and where the things are low? And people are like, oh, wait, that doesn't make any sense, right? And we strategize together. We asked for everybody in the community to weigh in, and we had lots of different ways, either at these tables or you could, we had a website called Engage DCPS. You could go on and leave your comments. And ultimately, we couldn't do everything. We got down to a set of closures and things that we needed to take into consideration. But what we did was we went back and explained every comment that we got. We put it on the website, and we literally like coded them green, yellow, red. Green were the things that people suggested that we did, and yellow were we didn't do them, but coming soon or something like that. And red was we couldn't do them or we're not going to do them. And here's the reason why. And people are reasonable. People know you can't do everything. And people know, okay, like we might get to this in 2 years, or here's the reason why. And so if you treat people the way you want to be treated, right? If I come with a suggestion and you just ignore it, that's one thing. If you come back and explain to me, Kaya, I can't do that because these 2 things are actually in front of it. And maybe we could do it in 3 years, but or it takes too many moving parts. And I'm like, okay, I got it, right? And I feel valued, validated, and I feel like I'm still a partner in this. But when you don't do my thing, you don't tell me why, you just keep it moving, it makes me feel like I was never really a partner in this. Yeah. And so I think that we owe it to people. If we're inviting feedback, we have to respond to that feedback. We have to value that feedback, and we have to address that feedback. And I think that is one of the things that we always went out of our way to explain. And again, not to everybody's satisfaction. You'll find 4 people on Twitter right now that'll be like, girl, you didn't explain this, or what about that, or whatever. Okay, but in large part, we went out of our way to explain to our community why we were doing things, what we were doing. Before we closed schools, I spent a year talking about how our resources were out of alignment, to the point that people were like, okay, we get it. Like, let's close school. Yeah, okay, yeah. Well, now we can have a conversation, right? Yeah. And so it is treating people the way you would want to be treated as a constituent.
Yeah, no, it is a great reminder of when we use the word partnerships, we really need to understand what that word means, and that's the right focus, and when that is the focus, then other things fall into place, in the way that you hope. We are very close to the end, but I am reminded that I should probably ask you at least a minute on what's Reconstruction and what are you doing with Reconstruction?
So the short pithy thing is think Hebrew school, right? Like Hebrew school is an opportunity for Jewish kids to learn their history, their culture, who they are in the world from their own perspective. And it might not have been hip or cool. All of my friends who went to Hebrew school, like Hebrew school is not hip, it was not cool. So I'm like, okay, this is the hipper, cooler version of Hebrew school for Black kids. This is an opportunity, a supplemental opportunity for African-American kids and other kids. We actually welcome whoever wants to come and learn about our history and our culture to read the books that they might not read in school, to learn the history that they probably aren't getting in school, to learn cultural traditions that, like, because we don't live near our extended family anymore, you might not learn, and ultimately to get African-American kids to see themselves differently in the world. That's what we're trying to achieve by giving them some pride in who they are.
Fantastic. Thanks for sharing that. And I want to just thank everybody for their involvement with us today. Kaya, this has been just an incredibly rich opportunity to listen to you and to have a chance to just get a sense of your experience and how you've reflected on it in a way that actually is so real for I know many of the listeners here who care very deeply about these issues and are doing this work every day. So thank you for making it as real as you did, and thank you for participating with us this afternoon. It's been very rich.
Thank you for the opportunity to share, Bob.
I hope it's the first of many other opportunities, actually. And so it's my job now to say thanks to everybody and to pitch it back to Ben to close. Thanks for everybody for attending.
Thank you, Kaya, and thank you, Bob, for sharing your insights and expertise with us. This was such an incredible conversation, and we'd like to thank everyone for being here to be a part of it. We hope that you all here will join us at other events throughout Cities Rising. This week, we'll focus on equity in K-12 education, and we're so grateful to the UVA School of Human Development and Education for their support and collaboration in building this program. There will be 4 panel conversations that will take place between tomorrow and Thursday, where we will hear from superintendents, teachers, and community leaders. We hope that you'll join us for any and all of those that you're able to attend. Cities Rising is all pay what you can, as you know, if you're here. Thank you to our sponsors and to the supportive community members like you. So if you're compelled or inspired by today's program, we invite you to become a contributing member to our foundation. So with that, thank you again, Bob, and thank you, Kaya, so much for being here. And we'll see you all soon.